In the spirit of getting as much out of this as we possibly can, I'm going to start even before Maria has to sit down. Just a quick introduction. My name is Shannan Lieb, and I'm the director just for this World of the Wheel track. And we hope that you enjoy the programming that we're providing for the whole con, but also for this room specifically for the whole weekend. And this is actually one of the panels that I've been most excited about. Actually, this was the one that when I got the job, this is the first thing I planned that I wanted to do because I feel like it's long overdue. And this is our, not trying to be insultingly named, it's not the Renaissance stupid panel. The intent is, I think it's really easy for a lot of people as they're reading the books when they don't have a lot of historical knowledge or frame of references for the myriad of cultural influences that both Robert Jordan and now Brandon draw upon for these books, to just kind of place this in your head as English Renaissance and Elizabethan and be done with it. But I think that if you're here, then you probably care enough to realize that that's not the case most of the time, almost all. So what we've done, we've got a panel of experts. I'm going to let them introduce themselves in just a second, but that are going to help us to learn more about the cultural, historical, geographical, whatever influences that have gone into so many of the different areas of Randland and the world of Wheel of Time. So what I'd like to start off with is we're going to have each of the panelists introduce them, and then to themselves, and to get started, to tell us about if they have a favorite cultural influencer area that you really enjoy either reading about or researching, and just kind of if there's one area you'd like to highlight and make sure that we don't forget to talk about in the next hour. Okay, so we'll start with Maria.
Hi, I'm Maria Simmons. I was Robert Jordan's assistant for many years, and I'm still working with Harriet and Brandon and Alan here to finish the Wheel of Time.
Yes, and we're going to talk about the encyclopedia, which we're calling the Codex, later in the weekend. Is there one area that you love?
There's so much I love, but I really do love Brandon's school that he starts. And Linda did a fabulous article on 13th Repository that, I learned so much. It was really great. But I just love, Beryl Park. She's got this thing she calls a glider. And she jumps off cliffs and she's got a broken arm at some point. That's fun.
Yeah.
It's not exactly cultural influence, but
well, and I mean that's a good point too. Is and one of the areas that we're going to talk about is kind of where you would place the world or parts of the world potentially within the development of our world. So if you have this frame of reference from Miss Bourne, we know that they have canning. We haven't seen canning in Wheel of Time, and so kind of what the timing influences as they've come through. So that's and the school is the example of the technology that's being developed. Sorry, Alan.
Alan Romancic, also, I've worked since I guess 2001, Bandersnatch with Jim Rigney and Maria and Harriet. What was the question?
If you have one area that you specifically love to research or work on.
Yeah, being interested in architecture anyway, is kind of fascinated with the different structures found throughout Randland, and particularly the ogre architecture. And I did a little research on that, to some conclusions.
Excellent.
I'm Rachel Little. I'm a fangirl who's in the right place at the right time. I enjoy costuming on behalf of Hair and Horse Scissors, and I enjoy right now. I enjoy placing cultures with their historical counterparts, like the Kyrie. Otherwise, I really my crowning achievement was realizing that there was no technology in Randland.
So I'm Aubree Pham. I'm the director of programming for JordanCon. I've been helping out with the Wheel of Time track at JordanCon for a number of years now. My biggest area that I enjoy doing as far as costuming is specifically embellishments and embroidery, and the the little things that make a costume rather than just a historical costume. So I like the cultural influence and all that sort of stuff.
Okay, I'm Linda Taglieri, and I'm the co-author of the 13th Depository Blogspot, and I've written a lot of articles on the different real-world influences. I started at Whatmania. I think my first article appeared in 2004 there, and I ran the fact there for up until it closed, basically, last year. Or a bit before that, because when I knew it was closing, I left to do my own stuff. And I'm gradually reposting everything I had there on this new site with pictures, which is kind of nice, and links and all the other mod cons that we never had, so it's been good. And do I have a favourite world influence? I have written so many. And even though I am an embroiderer and have done some Wheel of Time embroideries, that might not be my favourite thing, because I have my own embroidery, my real embroidery. Probably, it's I guess perhaps the non-European influences, and also perhaps the influences that went to make it Forsaken. And the Shadow.
Those are mythological.
Well, yes, I love all that. I've written hugely on that.
So we do absolutely want to give the opportunity to do Q&A, and I think that that's going to generate a lot of discussion and potentially derail and any of the topics that we want to make sure we cover. And I know that a lot of the panelists have done some specific research to prepare for this discussion, and I want to give them the opportunity first to share that knowledge. And so, Alan, I know that you talked specifically about the architecture. Can you share some of the influences that went into the different areas of the books?
Yeah, totally speculative, of course, because I don't think Jim had anything specific in his notes about it. But yeah, I fixated on the ogre architecture because while pretty much everything else in the books was familiar, the organic forms that they produced really fascinated me, and tried to picture it in mind. And I remembered a book someone showed me 15, 20 years ago, maybe, that was done by somebody who had some connection with rock stars and was an artist. And it had to do with ferro-cement. I don't know if you know ferro-cement construction, but they actually make ships out of it, homes, swimming pools. You form a mesh with rebar and chicken wire, basically, and with a gunite gun or a lot of labor, you press in concrete on both sides. And you can make a fairly thin hull if it's a ship or wall of a house. But the great thing about it is you're not really restricted to squares, rectangles, sharp corners. Everything can be very smooth and wavy. So the ogre architecture, with the construction that they did, seemed very, very similar to this. So I looked back, and the fellow who pioneered a lot of this was an artist who actually did art for rock band covers in the 60s and 70s, Roger Dean, who was a Brit. And he also had this fascination with what's become known as bioorganic architecture. And produced, with his brother Martin, they put out a book of their fantasy homes and public buildings, which were fantastic. I mean, it really was a lot like what the owners supposedly did. And their work, very little of it which actually came to fruition in actual housing. A lot of other architects and designers picked up after that, and there's some phenomenal things out there. But I should bring up one more guy. A century before, there was a postman in southern France named Ferdinand Cheval, who was a little eccentric, and for 33 years on his route, he would pick up odd-shaped stones off the ground and bring them home with him. he eventually had so much, he started construction on a palace. And in 40 years' time, he had constructed this fantastic organic structure out of concrete with all of these rocks that he had collected stuck in. And there are pictures of it around. It's called the Ideal Palace. The man's name is Cheval, and it's absolutely fascinating. And actually, he's considered the major proponent of dream architecture. But again, it's very ogre-like in the way it's constructed. You know, the rest of it, I don't know a whole lot. I mean, you know, Jim drew on influences of structures from all over the world. The ones where there's a lot of rock and maybe not a lot of wood, they would have the stone construction, and you know, as one would expect. The areas with a lot of snow would have very steep roofs. And, you know, so he was very conventional in that regard. I think that's about it. If anyone has any questions, otherwise we'll move on.
Maria, I know that I think that you were looking back specifically on the school and the technology that they had there. Would you like to talk about that, or is there another area that you?
Okay. What I was trying to find most was where the costumes came from. What Jim was actually looking at when he came up with the Irregardari dress. And I found nothing really.
Okay.
One thing that I've always found really fascinating and makes that world different from our world is that they have a printing press. And yeah, the new school, they're making the printing press better. But they had a printing press. They really had work. You know, they could convey knowledge more easily than the Renaissance onward until Gutenberg popped up. And it probably is at the point where it's well beyond Gutenberg in our world. And so that makes so many things different for them. And I really don't.
That's fine. Linda, as far as like the school or the different areas that you researched,
I've done the costume, but I haven't put all of that on the blog yet.
As far as like the non-European influences, can you talk to some of those?
All right. Well, I'll go with a different country. Take Shara. That's both African, and their appearance is described as the tight, wiry hair, and they use slaves a lot. But it's also Chinese in the way they've cut themselves off, and they have like literally barriers around, and they have just the ports that people are allowed to go to and no others. That's so typical of how imperial China was. And I guess they've got reverse concubines, you might say, where the rulers have the female channelers have the males as treated like almost like concubines, but worse really. So there is that sort of influence. And actually there was one Sharon that turned up in Tyr, and he was wearing a Mandarin collar. So yeah, and they have the silk, of course. So yeah, that's one. Okay, and then there's Shongchan, which is very interesting. It's both Japanese influence and Chinese influence. It's got, the way Tuon is, she's kind of got a feel of the end of like she's the last emperor, if you like, of that particular type, I think, in China. But also there's the end of how the Japanese Empire changed at the end of World War II or during World War II. Or there's always that last feel as though after Tuon or during Tuon's reign, it's going to be for Tuana as she is now, it's going to be different. It cannot be the traditional sort of thing. It has definitely got that feel to it, yes. And there's a lot of Chinese and Japanese sort of influences, including the clothing, again, the cut of the men's clothing in particular. And they've got, the women's dresses have got the tiny pleats. That's kind of shibori-like, because like when shibori's done, it's, okay, maybe you don't know shibori.
Well, there's a picture
Yes, that's true. The pleats are kind of, it's a mix of ancient Egypt, which there is also an Egyptian influence where people wear wigs to cover their baldness and the like. And the Japanese also do a type of, you could call it tie-dyeing, where they crunch the fabric up into these tiny little pleats and they stitch here and there, and then they dye that. But you can get, like, and that's the sort of pleating that the Seanchan nobles have, but they don't have the pattern dyeing on it as well. So, okay, that's a very brief thing.
Just talk about the Shannan, because yes, there were all those influences, but there was a fan letter Jim got once and wanted to know what different people's accents sounded like.
Yes.
And he revealed
I know.
that the Seanchan spoke with the Texas.
Yes, that's
matches
true.
well because it's
That
always
slow drawl.
Are there
So it's
accents
what, like,
that you revealed as
That letter it had several, and I don't really remember a lot of them. But that one just struck me as funny.
Yeah.
Really funny.
Hey y'all.
The Empress. I think that was more. I think they're British.
Yeah, they're the cult of the Queen, so it's the Virgin Queens.
And the two rivers are supposed to be Irish.
Who?
Irish.
Rivers have an Irish accent. Yeah.
I don't recall
They're
any.
actually, but they're also so early.
If you listen to the audiobooks, they really give all the Andorran nobles the British accent. It's really amusing.
Yes, very.
It is
clear.
I always thought the aliens were like Irish.
Which
The
one?
aliens.
Oh, the
Was that
aliens.
the way
The
they,
Dubes.
I always imagined them as Russian, which I know is not correct, but that's always how I imagined them.
I wish I could be
The Dubes sort of stuff. I actually came across a diary that was written in a Somerset dialect, and they had that sort of, we do be doing this and we do be doing that. So it's actually
Dutch.
yeah.
Dutch.
Oh, that's right. Yes.
Yeah, the beard,
Yes.
veil, Domon's
But
beard.
they've got real names.
Yeah.
Merchant fleet.
Yeah.
So, just in terms of the logic of all, if there is any. So post-breaking, in effect, I don't recall much about any foreign languages. So after the breaking, kind of some universal language took hold over the remnants of civilization that was left. And in the scattered four corners of the planet, they developed different dialects, all able to exchange and communicate with one another.
Well, I always had the printing press, so that's one of the advantages they had in keeping a static language that everyone recognized was
But
because they had
the ocean was an impenetrable barrier to Sanchin, and Shara was kind of off on its own. But still, they could communicate.
Went over there. It was a good bit after the break-in, and he would be taking all that stuff with him, his books, and so whatever language they were speaking, I'm not sure he would so they have different words they have to have, side chair and side mosier and stuff. But mostly they can understand each other as long as the Randland people speak.
Of course, yeah, Old Tongue, which is the Sanskrit to the Indo-Aryan languages as well, the same relationship.
that like the common tongue is actually closer to the old tongue, but he translated everything into English so we read it.
I think that's true.
Yeah.
I'm pretty sure.
That there's much less language drift than from between the old tongue and the common tongue, and would be apparent just reading the series because it had to translate everything. So, which I think makes a lot of sense.
Well, I have just a couple more questions, and I'm going to use my prerogative to ask them. Linda, have you seen any Australian influences?
There is a little bit in some of the Aiel attitudes, which actually Jim did mention that he had put in to, but other than that, I suppose the land of the mad side is supposed to be Australian because everything is strange, but yeah. Everyone tries to do that sort of thing too.
Yes.
It's not very fair. But yeah, there isn't much.
You
It's just
madmen
because
or criminals, you get the choice.
Okay. All right, is there anything else that you guys want to make sure that we cover before we open up the Q&A?
No, I think that we can do
All right.
audience
Raise your
direction.
hands.
What do you want to know about?
Really, because I'll go keep going with my questions. Go ahead.
Okay, this might take a little while because I've been a long way. But okay, so I'm a history student, and this semester I've been taking a class that involved discussions of the Byzantine Empire, and we were talking about the way the emperor and sort of the top echelon of Byzantine society were structured. And I sat through that class, and when I got out, my first thought was, that reminds me so much of the Shannan Empire. Do you know if there was any sort of, if that was purely accidental? Because I mean, with the Byzantine Empire, there were certain colors and things that were imperial, and you did not use them on pain of death, pretty much. And there were, you know, your importance was defined by your relationship to the emperor and all sorts of things like that.
I would say it's not accidental. Jim, I mean, he would mix it up with a great big spoon. He read everything. He really loved to read things about history. I know I have a section in my office like Byzantine Empire.
I was gonna say, not only the colors and things, but I would almost think that the like elitist fighting attitude of the Byzantines really meshes in there
Oh yeah.
as well.
But if you think about it, I defy you to find one country in the Wheel of Time that you can say, this is influenced solely by this. He loved throwing in several cultures in every single place. He just loved mixing up things, hybridizing.
Yeah. But you know how you were talking about the Shanshan having the basic labels of what your job is on you? That's very Chinese too, the quintal squares. Yeah.
And also, much of that comes from the old Roman Empire, the old Roman Republic. So you got 1,000, 1,500 years there where they inherited a lot of that stuff.
I just looked up the Wattback about the accents, and the list they have is Two Rivers is Irish, Ilianers are Dutch, the Aiel are somewhat Slavic, the Tyrans are Spanish, the Domani are Indian, Saldaean are Egyptian, North African, and Shanshan are Texas.
That just sounds so different.
Saldaean.
And of course, that's not to imply that because they had this kind of accent, that was the main cultural feature
No,
of that
that's
place.
not. Obviously, it certainly isn't in the Shanshan for a start.
Or the Aiel.
Oh, totally.
Talk like cowboys.
Texans get such a bad rap. Yeah.
More questions?
Well, I had a question. We were looking at Seafolk, and we were looking at maybe doing like a wave mistress thing or something. And so we got to researching the parasols, okay, because we thought those would be really cool to do. And what we found, I mean, and maybe this, I don't know, maybe I want a confirmation or whatever, but the Royal House of, was it Thailand? The Royal House of Thailand has these ceremonial parasols that are like squares or they're circle, like they look like wedding cakes.
I've actually
It's like
been
on,
there.
they're on a stick and they're tiered, and they don't really shield you from anything. They're more ceremonial.
They're royal.
And then there were some that were like Cambodian. There was Southeast Asia. It wasn't
Something
like
like that?
no, they were drum shaped. They were like a drum. Because this one
Like a lampshade.
queen woman, somebody, some royalty had died, and they had put all the regalia on one.
Yeah, you're
And
right.
so it was this, and then this, and then this, and it was color coded, just like the
And they
made
called
me
the
think of it.
parasols.
With gold tassels.
Yes,
So
yes.
just
That's all when I
straight
was
lines?
like, oh.
I'm sorry, I'm visual guys, I need to draw
Yes, like a wedding cake.
Okay, so just straight.
Well, you could,
Yes.
I mean,
But they weren't attached. They were
yeah,
separate.
it's like an umbrella, and there's like the stick, and then there's one layer, and then another layer.
Right, and then there was another one that was like maybe Vietnamese that looked like a real umbrella, and then they
You
had the
can see
frame.
the stick.
But I think
and
we
the
like
stick
the
is
other
like
ones
this thing
better.
hanging, and they're actually almost suspended independently.
Yes, they are. They're like a lampshade suspended from that pole window. So we were just watching.
Was that a Thai influence on that?
Maybe that.
We're looking at the right thing?
I mean, that's almost exactly how I pictured it, because I've seen this too, and as soon as I saw them, I was
So they're stuck in my head now, so you gotta tell me that's wrong.
Still are. Okay. Yeah. Some of them are crusted in gold.
That whole area from India over to Thailand has that. I mean, the jewelry of the sea folk is Indian. It's very Gujarati. Yes, all the chain. Yeah, and the tattoo, the whole bit, the tattoos.
Scent boxes too.
Yeah.
I just love them working around.
Yeah.
Everybody's
since we talked about European and then like Asian, is there any kind of American, obviously other than like maybe historical that anybody has seen?
Civil War. There's quite a few Civil War influences. Like the military costume for the Ashaman and for the Legion of the Dragon. We talked a little bit about this in Dragon, where we figured that the Ashaman military uniform is cut very similar to the Southern Civil War uniform, and the Legion of the Dragon is cut very similar to the Northern military uniform. So it's just interesting, and I know that Robert Jordan like the Civil War. So
He had not just sections on the Civil War, he had entire ranks of bookshelves on the
So it's not so much. And some of the costume on the BCF is reminiscent of the Angelica South. Yeah, big velvet bows, and bonnets.
You speak up,
Oh, sorry. With the big velvet bow is the Adomanis.
Adomanis.
And they're the bonnets and the ringlets and
Southern bells.
Southern bells.
And speaking of Adomanis, you mentioned white cloaks, that there being several influences there. Can you
Right.
expand that?
There are a lot of people here, it's like white folks, oh, they're megas and obviously that's the Ku Klux Klan.
Right.
More Knights Templar, but I wish I could remember who else he threw in with them. There were like 3 or 4 things he would mention that actually went into the white folks. Because some of them think they're doing the right thing, and others are obviously white. Just trying to make a group that didn't exactly match any real one, but Harry read this book on 10 Knights Templar. Oh yeah, that's kind of cool. How is that? And just small and white, yeah, that worked.
What about the Inquisitors? The Spanish Inquisition and the Inquisition, that's kind of
Yes.
Yeah.
the vibe I get off of it.
Well, and their costume is like 300-400 years behind everybody else's. I mean, when you see the white cloaks, they are crusaders. I mean, there are definitely 10th, 11th, 12th century knights. They are not up into where everybody else is.
Okay.
Yeah, but Jim's notion of the white cloaks, though, was any religion, any kind of fundamentalist thought that goes a little too far. And the intent is good, but the way it's executed is not so cool in all circumstances. I find Tyr really interesting too, because you have the nobility of Tyr acting and dressing and looking like, what is it, the Armada era Spaniards. And yet the common folk in that place, totally different. And, I see influences of Vietnam a lot there because of the raised houses on stilts in the Delta area. The funny clogs that they had to negotiate, and the conical hats.
He had that first, and then he got it.
Turkey. Oh, Jim.
Well, that's fair. I mean, it seems like Jim obviously took a lot of his personal experiences and drew from them.
And also Jim's brother lives in New Orleans, and the Delta there at Terre, really reminds me of that physically as well. So there's so many influences.
1, 2, 3.
The olive groves.
4.
Where we got the scene where the rocket taking off, landing, and they're feeding them. He wrote that not long after.
Alright, now,
Pretty sure they spent
same exact thing.
Where?
Greece.
Greece, northern Italy.
So what you're gonna do now?
And I always thought, he saw that, I gotta use that somewhere, and it was here.
When we're looking at the costume, obviously, okay, so I think we're trying to stay away from Britain because it's just the default, but moving away from like Elizabethan when we're talking about Tudor or Edwardian, do we see those influences either in costuming or somewhere else? You guys know?
The Andor in comparing historical costumes probably has one of the earliest periods that compares to our modern world, because their costume, rather than being 18th, 19th century, is more 15th century England. In particular, the Tudor period, where with the square necklines, the big difference is they have fitted sleeves rather than the really full sleeves that you would see on, like Anne Boleyn. That's about the only culture where you can say, yes, this looks more like this. For the women's clothing, at least. The men's clothing is not. There's sort of a disconnect there. The women's clothing is an earlier period.
Do you want to talk a little bit about the men's clothing? The men's clothing is more, you're into the 17th and 18th century with the full coats, the proper breeches, because Elizabethan England, they were wearing doublets and hose, and that's totally not what, So, and they had proper shirts and all that sort of thing, much more recognisable to modern men as acceptable clothing. They probably wince at the thought of trotting around in tights.
And that's one of the things that really pushes the entire Wheel of Time period to a later historical era, is the fact that the men's clothing is so identifiable.
But there's a lot of good women's clothing too.
Yeah.
Like in Candor, they're swanning around in Regency dresses with the little belts up under the bosom, and and the sort of skin. The noble women are. The country women are wearing culottes basically. We're into the 20th century. Candor. I'm probably saying it strangely to you. Sorry. That's one that really springs to mind. The pulling up of the skirts in Abu Dar, that's 1800s. I think I came across that, yes. The neckline that goes down is, that's from Syria. The long, narrow neckline that the commoner women, the keyhole one I think is, the keyhole neckline that the nobles women wear in Abu Dar. I think that's Jim's. Yeah. That's just nice, sexy stuff.
Actually, let's show your eyes.
Right. Obviously, I think one of the reasons why books resonate with so many people is that, all the details, whether it be, the marriage knives or, some of the.
There's new stuff in
Yeah. And I don't know if there was any influence. You talked about the jewelry for the Mahavir coming from India. Is the rest of it just made up? I don't know. back within?
Not necessarily Indian, but the sea folk. A lot of their stuff is a lot further along than everybody else. All of their craft come from mid-18th century on up. For instance, and actually even all of the sailing craft and all of the Wheel of Time are quite late mid to 18th century, late 19th century. Obviously the swords were based on the clipper ships that came out of the United States and Britain in the 1870s. But there are other crafts like the darters. They came from like the Baltimore clippers a little bit earlier in the 1830s and 1840s. And even
I would object to that. Long before that, I mean, I don't know a lot about it, but I remember the Cossacks from Ukraine had a vessel called the Seagull that could get across the Black Sea to make raids on Turkey, Istanbul, in a matter of a couple of days. It was preposterous how fast these vessels went.
Right.
And they had a narrow beam and sail and oar power. And reading some of the passages on that, that would come to mind. And that we're talking 16th century to 17th century.
Those vessels that we're talking about were Latine rigged rather than fore and aft rigged, and with like a brigantine rig, like what there's described directly in the books.
You've lost everyone.
I know. How many people know what's going on right now?
I know the terminology.
But I'm intrigued. Please.
But anyway,
I think that's awesome.
also their costuming was very much like the pirates of the Corsican Mediterranean coast. So voluminous pants with well, actually blouses and shirts, very free flow, which is makes sense because it's a standard working type of environment.
Of course, the voluminous pants also came again from the steppes, riding horses. And it was very practical to have the boots tucked into these blousy pants.
Come all the way back to the Parthians.
Sure. Yeah, I mean, cultures bring these things up again and again from the practicality of it because they work.
Yeah, one of the things, just like, and in the Wheel of Time, we tend to get technology and then lose it, get it again, lose it, get it again. Siegecraft is one of the interesting things. We forgot how to do it. I mean, it would seem like, how could you forget how to attack a walled city? But they did. And they did it several times, actually, where they were just, okay, now all we do is just camp around it and hope they starved to death. Because we forgot how to tear down walls. You know, it seems silly, but actually, historically, that's what happened.
So relating that back to the books, I mean, we haven't really talked about weaponry, and that's a great point. I mean, if anybody could share anything, like, obviously, canon is right there. But I mean, how do you see specifically Jim blending, historical weaponry influences within his magic system and making that work? Or, how do you see the influences for his boundary information? I don't know, just how he's approaching weaponry, especially with his personal history.
Like red swords and some of the other weapons were different. The Shannan helmet, I believe, was also Japanese.
Speak up.
Yeah, mostly he would just tell me what the actual sword was, and tell me a story of who used it and stuff, and put it away. And I'm so clueless that, it might have been something he handed me the next day. He had something, and I would never recognize it.
Have you seen an influence like on the Arafel and about the swords, or anything like, or I don't know, parents' acts, or obviously, he must have spent evidently a long time like learning about blacksmithing.
That's interesting. When he started writing, got books on blacksmithing, he's writing, and it's like, he always taught blacksmithing. And got some very helpful stuff.
Is that what Bell found her, or?
It's interesting. Our success was, we had a library semi-organized, not really, but the books he used most, he had shelves, and there were books all about horses. On birds, on trees, on insects, on architecture,
The art of war.
the art of war, that's what I was trying to get. Masonic rites.
A lot of Masonic rites and witchcraft, demonology.
Art of the samurai.
Broad interest, you get that idea?
Just pull stuff down and start looking, and occasionally, he couldn't find what he wanted, and he would, call me and say, this is on the table, but the bread. I need to know exactly what it was.
A lot, but how do you develop gunpowder from nature? It's never been done before. So, how do you clean silk if you don't have a dry cleaner down the street? It's like called my sister-in-law who lives in India. How do the villagers deal with silk? So she described very detailed. So that appeared in the next book.
Purple was first, and then
Can you tell me more costume-wise about that? My personal area of historical interest is Central Asia and the Islamic world, and so my brain keeps trying to overlay these deep desert kind of costumes over the top, and I'm wondering if I'm in line with every video. It's pretty rough. And there was
There is the coat and trousers is from the steps, but yeah, they've got the veils and it's in a general way. Specifically, no, it's not. It's tight like the steps, but they've got all yeah, that's more. That's actually Indian, isn't it? American Indian. Yeah, we wear that sort of the women's clothing. A patch. Yes, well, whatever. But yeah.
And the shoe, the skirt that they wear, is there any, I haven't read all the books yet, I'm working on it, is there any indication of what shape that scarf is? I mean, it just says scarf, but.
It just says lines.
Yeah, I think it's just
Narrow,
just big. I wouldn't say any less narrow than this, really, because you have to be able to get a wrap. You have to wrap a whole head and get.
Yeah, so actually that's IEL is not my area, but whenever they, when they cover their faces, it feels like they go like this and they're done. Like, is there a hook? How are they doing it?
There's some draping and all of that. It's not just to deal with cover face for identity, but also consider like sandstorms.
That looks like the graphic novel.
Yeah.
So you think they're just pulling it up and they're done?
No, there's a separate piece, but for our purposes.
Okay.
Maybe they've got little strings around here. Alright, my question was, back to the arms, the weaponry. Historically, it seems like there's everything under the sun, pretty much weapon-wise, unless it's
a gun, or any type, way, shape, or form. Do you agree? We just have no firearms.
Crossbow's the
Crossbow.
closest thing to it.
Yeah, we've got bows, we've got swords, I mean, and up until we get the first, prototype of guns, pretty much what we always had, right? I mean, so, does that sound right?
Yeah, I mean, the closest thing to
I
gunpowder.
mean, you could even be like now, I mean,
Yeah, the closest thing to gunpowder there was what the illuminators.
Right.
They're gonna.
But they kept it secret, and so they kept it from everyone else. And I guess the magic ability has delayed the development of the weaponry, unlike all the other inventions. They're sort of more, well, at least 1600, I say 1700 into 1850 almost, but the weapons are way back in 13. The lack of guns, it's more like late 1300s into 1400s.
Did the Chinese keep gunpowder secret
I would say that, but in real life, in our history, if you discounted firearms, we never really had anything other than that. Everything that you consider modern weaponry is all based on gunpowder. I mean, they're all some type of firearm. Until we got lasers. We're working on lasers. But, I mean, am I not remembering something? I mean, is that even parallel?
You could also question the difference between the current age and the books and the past age, the age of legends, where weaponry was really sophisticated, the shock lances and so forth. That was a society that was almost destroyed because of war and the effects. So they had to kind of go back to square one on the current age. Oh yeah.
Oh yeah? What?
Oh yeah. Yeah, his name is Don Tasme, bro. Yeah. No, it's like a taser on a stick. You know.
Cattle prod?
Yeah. Cattle prod, big cattle prod. Yeah.
That's what I was like, hot shot. It takes us a moment. Hot shot.
Go ahead.
You mentioned, some of the books that were used in the writings. You mentioned Sun Tzu. What philosophers did you really key on any more than others, such as Machiavelli? And I see a lot of influence on Machiavelli in the books. Any other philosophers that influence the writings in some of the different cultures?
That specifically, again, we have a library of 15,000 volumes, most of which he read cover to cover. There was, I would have to say there was probably a lack of Western philosophy in relation to what came out of Asia in Jim's library. Yeah, and that being said, I mean, Herod Feld really seems to be more of a Western philosopher in his approach, the rationality. What's that book, Reason and Unreason or something? Min keeps reading it. And the logical structure, that probably would have come out of Plato, Socrates, the Greek philosophers. But we really see more of the philosophy and the art of war and the systems. And despite, Jim was really strange too in his knowledge. He seemed to know a lot about everything, and yet there were some real lacks that he would have to ask about the whole systems of meditation and yogis, what they do with their bodies and that sort of thing. Because the whole thing, remember the ability to withstand cold and heat without feeling it, which was not a power. It was something that was learned. And, I had to give him information about that, which anybody who had done meditation and knew anything about yoga and so forth and so on would have known. And yet, you get into some of the Taoist thoughts and some of the Chinese, the ancient Chinese things. He really knew. He was really on top of that stuff. So it was sketchy in some cases, but in other cases incredibly raw. And it's just, it's so much fun just to see what gets pulled out every page. There's something different coming at you from several different directions. It's lovely to see. And it's the equivalent of reading about a new weapon somebody has, a new sword, and looking on the wall. Oh yeah, it's that one over there. Any topic, it's the same way.
He's talking about the tinkers.
The tinkers.
Yeah, the travelers.
Gypsies.
Yeah.
Oh,
What else?
Everything about gypsies that you always hear negative is totally not true.
Yeah, I mean, remember, right in the beginning, I think there are rumors that they steal babies.
Yeah, and there's the songs about the tinkers fixing cars.
So I do know someone who was stolen by gypsies as a child.
For real?
Yeah.
For real?
Romania.
There's some other influence on the tinkers, I think, but I can't
But they kind of remind me of, the traveling salesman from the early 1900s, maybe, or
Yeah, and there are also what do they call the Irish tinkers? Irish travelers, yeah.
Yeah, they're in that part of the country, aren't they?
They're down our way.
Yeah, right across the border.
But there's something else, that whole exercise of wandering through the song and basically trying to find themselves.
But the total nonviolence thing is another part of it.
Yeah, you could almost say they're a counterbalance to what's going on in the real world there. I mean, they have their own journey, which is a journey of peace at all costs, because that's so embedded in their culture. Whereas Rand and our heroes have their own journey too, which is countering the effects of the Dark One and winning the last battle.
But to me, one of the most interesting facets of the books is the way that the Aiel come from the Tinkers and how
They started out in fashion.
and how you can still see their influence and their anti-influence all at the same time. And we hate those people. But we let them in our land, when no one else can come in. We don't want anybody, if we talk to them, we might find out a little about our history.
The Carhyon are also interesting in that way too. Very straight-laced people who once a year just anything goes, and it's the release valve. And so what's that based on? Anyone have any ideas?
Well, the Japanese are very straight
You are.
laced.
Mardi Gras.
got Mardi Gras.
Saturnalia. A lot of cultures had that song.
Actually,
There's so much innuendo of it. I went to the one party and there's so much innuendo. I'm just like, I was blushing and I was driving my car listening to this going, that's damn near porn. I'm talking about learning how to play a flute. I was like, I'm never going to read this part and say it again. So yeah, they've always been.
It's almost a rite of passage for the Amish as well. And they get to 18 or so to kind of go off and take a week or just experiencing the world and make your decision whether you want to be in that life or not.
And pre-Christian Europe, pretty much across the continent, was it Beltane in the west, and there are other names for it, but it seems to fall around the summer solstice.
And that was in Two Rivers.
That was true. Yeah, and the name was so similar. But
Yes, we have a maple.
and maple.
What is
the influence of the Domini dress? Where does that come from and what does it look like? Domani dress? Is it just his thing, of just a slinky
I
dress?
think it was a bar Jim went to when he was
That's
so
real fit.
revealing.
Form-fitting, very thin, high neck.
It's a combination of kind of Indian, but also the harem type thing too. From
It's not actually sheer, it's just
almost. Yeah, it's very. Yeah, there's sort of some part of India where the dress is more like there is a caste where they're actors and they're called Damani and they do like they're cheeky. So yeah, so yeah, I think that will appear on the blog in the next. Yeah, I know. I do have a life outside of the blog.
Any last questions? Sorry, 5 more minutes. Do you have one?
Oh, I just had a little mention when we were talking about how the firearms progress had been held back so much. My understanding was that the greatest contribution to that was the fear of the one power since the breaking had happened. Anything that might resemble the one power would immediately be knocked down because people would be afraid to start.
And isn't it ironic that the very person who's going to enable all this really fears the one power?
It's the breaker.
Well, the ancient legends say that there's a blend of one power and technology. So I can see how you're there because before all much of the technology was powered by.
And if you do anything that might consist of the one power, it could be involved in another part of the world where the Chinese could make the little robots that were autonomous, they could move and serve, and where somebody in Randland might try to control the system, it would say, oh my gosh, you're powerful. Or it might look like you are, so you'll bring the wrath of the people against us, so they will be suppressed.
I'm thinking about the cross.
The wine and
The automated clock. Yeah, the automaton.
It was the first walk.
It's called an automaton.
I have one more just to wrap it up, and then obviously, you know, through Jim's bio and his other works, if it's Fallon's Blood or whatnot, obviously we see his deep love and appreciation for Charleston. Have you seen specific Charleston references in that series?
In Charleston, there's a street called Ogier Street. And he says, you know, when he was making up the name, he didn't think about that street, but he said, I think it's a surname. And he didn't realize that's what he'd done, but with names especially, you know, he basically collected the stuff and then it would come out. Changed a little bit, I would say the same.
Yeah, and where he lives is at the corner of Tradd and Logan. And I'm sure Logan came from Logan. Also, Jenna Eel. It's obvious what that came from, right?
Jane.
No. Their cooktop is a Jen Eyre. So it's.
I was like, oh my gosh, you got that on. Oh. And of course, Charleston is known as the place where the Ashley and the Cooper River meet to form the Atlantic Ocean. And we're in the two rivers.
Excellent. Okay, well, we're at the end of our time, but I hope everybody's really had a good time, and we'll see you